Now, I travel some of these remote areas in these Appalachians. Some places are just hard to get to in the middle of nowhere. And I explore these places, these old forgotten places of our pioneers, and I run across stuff like this. Old graveyards, really old. Most are unmarked, unknown. And I noticed a lot of babies in these graveyards, a lot of babies. Now I'm going to share a little history with you of how these people used to doctor themselves and why there's so many babies in these graveyards. So much history here. Most of it's forgotten. Now these Appalachians are among the oldest mountains in the world, and they hold a lot of history themselves. And the Native Americans come in here thousands of years ago. This is their land, and they lived one with it. And they worshiped this land. They knowed all the plants, all the cures, and all the animals. And they worshiped this place. This was their land. And there was a lot of different people here too. A lot of different tribes here in the southeast, along these riverways and waterways, even along the mighty Mississippi. There was all kinds of tribes. And they are said to have been over 1 million here at one time, thriving along the southeastern United States, and lived in villages like this. Big communities, all up and down these waterways. Big settlements for thousands of years. Now the first European explorer to come in here in this country was Hernando de Soto in 1540. He was from Spain. He was looking for gold, land to claim for Spain. But he brought more with him here than just his people and his conquest for gold. He brought back something here to these Americas that the Native Americans didn't have any immunity to, unknowingly knowing that they brought a disease in here called smallpox that was devastating to their Native Americans. So these great tribes, 90% of them disappeared. By the next 100 years or so, white settlers started moving in this country. These people were already gone. All was left is what you see today of the modern tribes. These great people died of disease. They didn't. The sad thing is, they didn't even know what was killing them. Well, some 200 years later, they come into this country, these mountains, trying to settle, trying to start their own lives from the East Coast and from their old country which they came from. A lot of immigrants coming into this country. And they started little places like this throughout the mountains, these rugged mountains, little homesteads, little farms, with their bare hands out of this wilderness. And here's a little picture of a little boy and a little girl that I noticed in one of these old pictures, peeping out around that old cabin. Precious. And they lived in places like this all up and down these mountains, all up and down these Appalachians. These families lived hard. Some of them had big families, and they worked hard at it. It was a simple life. It was just hard work. And they made everything on their own. They lived off the land, and they made everything themselves. They either made it, trade for it, or done without. Even their own clothing. They were on their own in these mountains. They were so hid away in these mountains, so separated. But they enjoyed their life, and it was a hard life for most of them. carving something from nothing. And these men, they about worked themselves to death if they didn't. An early grave working on these old farms, this land, trying to make something to pass down through the generation. And these old coal miners, they surely died early. They really worked themselves to death, but that's how they had to make a living. And the women, they come into this country, these were hard women. Most of them, here's a picture of them having a baby, but most of them just laid on a bed, and they're lucky they had a midwife with them when they had these kids. And they had plenty of kids too. But some of them didn't make it. The baby died in childbirth, and the mother too. Them was sad times. It just happened all up and down this country. And these people, they learned their different medicines, how to cure this and how to this from their old ways they brought in here with them. But a lot of it they learned from the Native Americans. They called them mountain witches, but they were medicine people. These were medicine women. They knowed all the herbs and plants. And where was their medicine cabinet, their pharmacy? Here it is. I'm a firm believer that every cure for every disease and illness is in these mountains. It just needs to be found and developed. Here's the most sought after plant in these mountains. Ginseng. And here's what it looks like. The most sought after plant. But sad to say, it's over harvested. But these old people, they know what this plant was, and they know what it can do. Now these mountain people, they had big families, and they were tight-knit communities too in these mountains. And a lot of them suffered and struggled, and some of them just didn't make it. It's sad, so many mothers trying to care for their babies in these mountains, and not much they could do for them, besides what they could give them herbs and medicine they knowed in these mountains. And these little kids, they had a hard time growing up. All the fevers and little sicknesses they had no cures for back in the days. And a mom with a house full of kids, trying her best to feed them and raise them best you could. And it didn't matter what color you was, what race you was, they all suffered back in these mountains. These communities were so isolated. They had no much medicine at all. And trying to take care of a kid that's hurting, don't know what's wrong with it, you're doing the best you can. And these mothers had a hard time. They was probably a day or 2 days away from any kind of town in these mountains. And it's sad when you see stuff like this I see in these graveyards. Some of them are marked. Here's a baby. But you don't know what happened. You just don't. So sad. But the biggest thing in these mountains on children, adults too, but children really had it hard, was typhoid fever. And everybody asked, well, what is typhoid fever? Well, it's a bacterial disease spread through contaminated water or food or just close contact of somebody carrying this disease. And here you could see some of them's marked, most is not. and it had a 30% death rate, even higher among the children. Sad times. Even the White House of our country in 1862, President Lincoln, his son died from typhoid fever. William. Now, here's one of the carriers. Everybody's heard of Typhoid Mary. Her name was Mary Malone. She was an Irish immigrant, a cook, and she's said to have spread typhoid fever to over 200 people and all across the country. And then some of them people carried it to other people, so it just spread. And it finally spread into these mountains and these little communities, and they just wasn't no cure for it. They done the best they could. A lot of them died. And these little graveyards is full of them. Unmarked graves, little babies. But the best thing about it is the good Lord knows who every one of them are and where they're at. Now at its height, in 1891, there had been 100,000 people die from this typhoid fever. It was a deadly disease with no cure at the time. But the cure finally come in 1911. But it was years later before it made its way into a vaccine into these mountains. A lot of these little children didn't grow up to be adults. They caught some of these viral diseases, and they just couldn't live through it. There just wasn't much medicine back in them days, except for what they got out of these mountains. So a lot of them didn't make it. Sad times. Now, they didn't have no modern medicine like they did today, and they sure didn't have no doctors come to their house for a long time. It was slow in these mountains. But eventually, times changed. They had nurses and doctors go throughout these communities, checking on the health of the welfare of the people. And they slowly helped change things, got vaccinated and stuff. And these little country doctors would go just from community to community, trying to help what they could with what medicines they had at the time. But one of the biggest things was penicillin. Now they had their own little cures here in the mountains. They called it moonshine, white lightning, and it healed a lot of little problems, but it didn't cure everything. It was more or less something else just for a community drink. And back in the old days, they'd do such things as bloodletting, where they'd let blood out of so much blood out of you, supposed to help you, made you better. But I think that was such a waste of time, just old medical cures that didn't work. Now I can remember back in my grandmother telling me that her dad was a Baptist preacher that'd go around the communities in the county and preach. And he, back in the Spanish flu of 1918, he would check on people, and he'd come back and say that they would be whole families just died of this flu. It was so devastating in these mountains. You got to understand, these mountains are so isolated. So things were slow coming in here, and then they were slow leaving too. So much history passed through these old mountains, good and bad times. Now they had all kinds of concoctions and stuff for illnesses and everything. You can see right here, one of them was castor oil. I can remember when I was a little old bitty thing, that anything that ailed you, castor oil or cod liver oil, take it. Now it was good for worms. And people say, well, you got no worms. Well, yeah, they was worms. People get worms just like anything else. But this would drive them out of it. But them days is long gone. A lot of them didn't make it. These old mountains were hard on people. And they suffered for it too. But it's sad when I see stuff like this. Unmarked graves from back in the early days, hard-working settling people in these mountains. You don't know who they are, how they died. And a lot of their families just died off generation after generation. So they're forgotten about. We don't know who they are. But the good Lord knows every one of them and every soul. So I want to thank y'all for watching. Hope you enjoy these little things of history throughout our mountains. So God bless. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.